А, офигеть, я могу все-таки какие-то публикации делать и дрить. Надо почаще на YouTube заходить. Ладно. Так, и непонятно, я запустил ли стрим. По идее, должен быть. Да, вырубись. Есть такое. О, ну чутка получше. Есть такое. Сойдет. О, ну чутка получше. Есть такое. Ладно.
The one you see here is a function expression, meaning we are explicitly saying inside toggle lid, there's a function that has these parameters, and this is the function body. We can also do a shorthand for this by taking the function expression away and just saying toggle lid parentheses and then the parameters. It works pretty much the same way, but this shorthand is somewhat harder to read. So the convention is to use a function expression. So it says function, it's very clear what's going on. Now let's look at how one of these methods work. So we have this toggle lid method. Inside the toggle lid method sits a function that receives one parameter. A parameter is a piece of data we can pass to the function. That parameter is then used inside the function to set the new value for the lid open property. So we're saying this current object's lid open property using dot notation, set the value of that equal to whatever sits inside lid status, which is passed as a parameter. Now, we haven't covered functions yet, so here's a quick crash course. And by the way, you can also skip ahead to the chapter on functions if you want to go in more in-depth right away, but it's not necessary. We'll get to functions at a logical point in the progression of this course. A function, like you see here, is a program that does something, typically change a value somewhere. Its most basic form is a function expression, like the one you see here, where we say function, meaning it's a function. Then we use parentheses to capture any parameters passed to the function. These are the values the function can use. And then we wrap curly brackets around the statements of the function. So what the function does. Function, parameter, curly brackets around the statements that sits here. To make a function run, we call it by stating its name and then adding two parentheses behind it. This tells JavaScript, this is a function and I want to run it. It's called a function call. If we want to pass values to the function, we put those values inside the parentheses and they become the parameters of the function. Let me show you how this works. We can do it first in the browser. So we'll try to use this toggle lid function to change the lid open value. First, I'll log out the lid open value. So I'll say backpack, lid open, and you can see the value currently is false. Then we'll use the toggle lid method. So I'll say backpack, and because it is a property, I can just call it using dot notation. So I'll say toggle lid. Now, the toggle lid method is a method, meaning we need to tell the browser, hey, we want to run this as a function. So I'll put parentheses around it. Then I need to pass the value. Remember, inside this function, we are grabbing a parameter, and then we're using that value to reset the value here. So I want to set the value to true, since this is a Boolean value. Hit return, and we get this undefined because the function itself is not returning anything to the browser. However, something changed in the backpack lid open. So if I arrow key up twice, I get to the call for backpack lid open, and you see the value is now true.
Так, ну это надо протестить. О, кстати, игра закачалась. Ну, типа установилась. Окей. Сижу на торрент разгрузках, загрузках, раздачах. Ну, до момента. Так, окей. У меня тут, в принципе, все идет по обучению, все по курсикам. И вот мой локальный хост. Сейчас еще раз проверим. Backpack. Вот у нас есть объект backpack, все окей. И там еще внутри, по идее, есть такая же функция toggle lead. И как мы ее вызываем? Сначала алло, backpack точка прикольно написал. Сейчас обновлю. Open. Так, сейчас у нас, в общем, крышка нашего рюкзака не открыта, то есть закрыта. Чтобы нам ее открыть, у нас есть такая функция toggle lead. То есть, опять же, берем наш объект backpack .toggle lead и сюда у нас прописываем true. Все. Она пишет undefined, потому что мы здесь, ну, типа, ничего сразу не возвращаем. У нас нет return, типа, привет нам, hello. Просто такое. Значит, теперь можем проверить, как у нас настроился ли backpack на. Ну, блин. Backpack. .lead open. Смотрим. False. Ну, может, это из-за того, что я тут изменил, сохранил файл по новой. А ну-ка. Вот теперь работает, да. Понятненько. В общем, теперь у нас крышка открыта. И мы это сделали с помощью метода toggle lead равно true. Мы тут указали в параметрах то, что это true. Ну, типа так, щепоньк. True. Перешло сюда у нас true. И к объекту нашему backpack у нас lead open стал равно true. Легко, понятно.
Now important, I didn't change the value in script.js. This value only changed inside the browser. And that's kind of the point of having these methods. We can now pass an object to the browser and then change its properties at will using the methods. And those changes only happen in the user's computer, in the user's browser at that moment. We can also access these methods and use them inside our script. And down here, we have the new strap length method as well. This one has two parameters, length left and length right, because we're changing both of these properties up here. So to access this, we first need to see that this actually happens. So let me console log out the value of the strap length left before, then run the method, and then console log it out again after to see that the change happened. So let's say console log left before, and then we grab backpack dot strap length dot left. Then we use the new strap length method. So I'll call it by saying backpack dot new strap length. And here I need to pass in two values, one for left and one for right. So I'll say 10, 15. And then I'll just copy this line at the top here and paste it in and then say left after. Okay, so you remember how the browser reads JavaScript from the top to the bottom. What will happen here is the browser will read down and go blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, you want to console log out the backpack strap length left, right? Here's the value. Then it encounters backpack's new strap length and says, oh, you want to run this method? Cool, I'll run the method. The method will then change the values up here. strap length left and right to 10 and 15 because of this function. It grabs the two values, passes them in, reassigns these values. Then we go down and say console log again, same value, backpack strap length left. We have now changed those values so we get a different output. Save this, run it in the browser, and you see now we have left before 26 and left after 10. This, in a very simplified form, is how methods work. We define them inside the object, then we call them using dot notation, pass.
Короче, он, в общем, сделал, в принципе, то же самое, только не через консоль уже, а через код поставил новые значения с помощью метода newStrapLength. В общем, в точности такая же очевидная херня, но только через код.
Parameters.
Делать я этого, конечно же, не буду, потому что это слишком очевидно.
Before we go any further, I want you to practice building methods. Now, as I've already pointed out, we haven't covered functions yet, so you may feel like you're in deep water here. So let me narrow this practice assignment down for you. In the practice files, there's an object with a bunch of different properties. Some of them are strings, some are numbers, some are booleans. To practice creating and using methods, I want you to create new methods in this object, one to change each property. The important things to remember here are, 1, we pass values to a function by placing them inside the parentheses. 2, from within an object method, we refer to the current object as this. Number 3, any property can hold any value. So once you can access a property from within a method, you can set that property to any value you like.
Легчайшее.
Now we get to the really interesting part of objects, creating object blueprints or templates using classes. Side note, classes are a relatively new introduction to JavaScript, but they've been around in other programming languages for a long time.
Вот классы уже чуть-чуть поинтереснее, чем просто функции. Вот их я бы и поделал. Как у нас тема называется? Объекты. Понятно. Это у нас еще видосиков 6 про объекты. Потом sidebar, string output. Не знаю о чем это. Ух ты. Дома элементы типа это по HTML-ке. Работа будет, я так понимаю, больше с ней и JavaScript. JavaScript плюс HTML. Немного про переменные. Ну, это тоже должно быть очень легкое. Troubleshooting and validating JS. Вот это меня больше интересует, на самом деле. Ивенты тоже, может быть. И опять целая тема про функции и методы. Ну окей. Продолжим тогда.
So if you have previous experience with classes in other languages, this will all look very familiar to you. Okay, say you have a series of objects and you want to make quick work of setting them up. Verbosely declaring each object the way we've done so far would produce a lot of code and a lot of repetition, since each property and method would have to be defined for each new object. A better solution is to build some sort of template, and for that we have classes. Classes work as templates for an object type, and anytime we create a new object based on a class, that object automatically gets all the properties and the methods from that class. That means we can change the properties of the class or the methods of the class, and those changes apply to every single instance of that class that we've created. In the exercise files for this movie, I've made some significant changes. There's a new file called backpack.js that exports a new backpack class. You can see the class here, it's called backpack, and at the very bottom it says export default backpack. Inside script.js, that exports a new balance of that class that we've created.
Тут просто немного интересно то, что работа с модулем, и я не помню ее. Ну, в общем... Блин. Вот он, JavaScript модуль. Ну, короче, походу вспомню.
In the exercise files for this movie, I've made some significant changes. There's a new file called backpack.
Ну, сделал модуль, типа отдельный JavaScript файлик с backpack.js
that exports a new backpack class.
И, кстати, сделал он это... Ну, типа, теперь это у нас не функция backpack, а класс.
You can see the class here. It's called backpack. And at the very bottom, it says export default backpack.
И внизу экспортирует его в скрипт. А скрипт он у нас идет в индекс. Вот так вот. Такая вот матрешка. Раз, сюда скрипт, потом в индекс.
Backpack. Inside script.
No.
JS, we are importing that backpack class from backpack.js, and then we use...
Ладно, в принципе, интересно. Я бы уже это сделал. Так. Что у нас там? Backpack.js. И он это описывает у нас класс. Backpack, так? Просто... Просто есть, ну, типа, конвенция и как правильно писать все эти штуки. Вот, к примеру, в питоне я бы написал это так. Но у него почему-то написано это так. Значит, буду писать на JavaScript так. Так, блин, ну тут он до хера, если что, пишет. Это у нас какой урок? 3.10. Какой-то конструктор, не до конца понимаю его. Определяет параметры. Я так понимаю, это типа как инициализация init в питоне. Возможно. Определяются все параметры. Типа, что мы здесь передадим, то у нас и будет в объекте. Типа, ну, то же самое. И импортится это у нас. Хорошо. В скрипте у нас. Сейчас посмотрим. Прикольно, она уже подсказывает, что у нас тут было неправильно. Хотя мы еще даже не запустили код. Ой-ой-ой. В чем прикол? Типа... Все окей? Окей. Так. Ну, в общем, эта строка у нас говорит, что мы хотим импортировать вот это вот имя, backpack, в данном случае это у нас класс, с файлика backpack.js. Backpack.js у нас тут, и имя этого backpack, вот оно, и это у нас класс. И в этом файлике мы говорим, что окей, мы по дефолту экспортируем этот backpack. В принципе, все логично, все понятно. В питоне я бы вот это вот в конце строку не прописывал, потому что, ну, и так понятно, что будет прописываться. Но, с другой стороны, там есть еще одна конструкция, о которой я пока не буду говорить, потому что изучаем мы пока JavaScript. Константа everyday pack, new backpack. Тут он, походу, создает объект backpack на основе вот этого класса. И этот объект у нас называется everyday pack. Имя ему everyday pack. 30 volume, color gray, там 15 pocket нам, лямки 26 и открытый равно у нас false. Понятно. В принципе, более-менее понятно.
Exports a new backpack class. You can see the class here. It's called backpack. And at the very bottom, it says export default backpack. Inside script.js, we are importing that backpack class from backpack.js, and then we use it to create a new backpack object here and output the values of that object in the browser, just like we have before. Finally, in index.html, I'm importing
Блин, да, я забыл про индекс.
both of these JavaScript files, backpack.js and script.js.
Почему-то, нам надо еще указывать в индекс HTML то, что мы хотим здесь еще один. Ой-ой-ой. Сейчас. Надо эту строчку скопировать. Я хочу... Вот так. Почему-то в HTML мы должны еще указывать, что мы импортируем сюда JS Backpack. Почему оно не может взять значение всех переменных просто с файлика .js? Не знаю. Честно. Это было бы удобнее.
JS and setting them up as modules. You'll remember from the beginning of the course that we talked about using modules to have files depend on each other. That's what we're doing here. And we can do it because a class is something that is only used in...
Кстати, интересно, что он тут прописал тип модуль. У меня не прописано. Что это значит, я не до конца понимаю, почему мы прописали тип модуль. То есть type модуль. Я не знаю, для чего это. Для чего нужен. Давайте пока продолжим.
Internally in the JavaScript. We don't need to gain access to the class from the browser through the console or anywhere else. So a class is a perfect candidate for using modules. Let's see how all this fits together. To create a class, we start with the class keyword followed by a capitalized name. This is a naming convention to ensure we know we're now looking at a class instead of just a regular object. There are actually two ways of declaring a class. You can either do this, what you see here, which is called a class declaration, class followed by a name, or you can set up a class expression where you create a constant with a name, again capitalized, and then you set it equal to class and then the curly brackets. These two are just two different ways of doing the same thing, and a choice between a declaration and an expression is mainly one of preference. The trend currently seems to be to use an expression, but there's no reason to use an expression over a declaration. They are the same thing. Inside the class, we use a constructor method to literally construct the object created from that class. The constructor method first defines the parameters for each of the properties. That's done inside the parentheses here. So you see here's a list of all our properties. Then inside the curly brackets, it defines all the properties and set their values to the parameters that have been passed in from the class. This constructor is a method inside the class, and it uses these parameters to populate these properties down here. Everything here works the same way as what we've seen before. We use the this keyword to point to the current object. Then we use dot notation to go to the property in question and set the property value equal to whatever value was passed in through the parameters. We can also add methods to classes, so they are applied to all objects created from that class. To do so, we add the methods after the constructor method. So this curly bracket here wraps around the constructor method. After that curly bracket, we then declare the toggle lid method and the new strap length method. These methods will then be appended to the object we've created once we use the class to create an object. Now that we have a class in place, we can use it to create those new objects, and that's done the following way. First, we create a new variable, in this case a constant called everydayPack. Then we fill it or set it equal to a new backpack. So this is how we use a class to create a new object. We say the word new, this is a keyword, and then we point at whatever constructor we want to use, in this case the backpack class. And then we just pass in the values for each of those properties as parameters. So here we have the name, the volume, the color, the number of pockets, the length of the straps, and finally the lid open status. And these match up to these properties: name, volume, color, pocket number, strap length, and lid open. This piece of code here creates a new object for us, and that object becomes available just like the object we've worked with so far. That means we can now console log out the everydayPack object entirely, or we can go in and get the everydayPack pocket number property specifically from this object. So if I take this and run it in my browser, you'll see here we have the everydayPack object. This is the full object again, only this time it tells me this was generated from the backpack class. You can see it says backpack at the top. And then down here we have the pocket number value, 15, from that object. To create new objects, all you have to do now is just create a new constant with a new name and then say new backpack and pass in the values, and you'll create a whole new backpack. So now you can generate many different objects without having to verbosely declare those objects in your main file. One thing to note here is you can only use a class after it has been declared. Remember, JavaScript reads from the top down. You have to make sure the class is declared before you start using it. A good way of avoiding this problem altogether is to place your classes in a separate file and importing them, because all imports need to happen at the top of the main file where it's being used. So that way we know the backpack class has been declared before we use it, because the import happens at the very top. Using a class to create an object template allows us to define the property and method structure for all the objects created with that class without having to redeclare them over and over. And if a property or method needs to be changed, you can change it in the class, and then all of the ancestors, so all the objects that have been created from that class, will also update automatically. While classes are the preferred tool for creating object templates, there is another shorter and less advanced way of doing the same thing, which relies on a basic function. It's called an object constructor function, and you can see an example of it.
Так, uno momento. Девочки пишут. На месте. Так. А ну, посмотрим. Опять 6 стрим. Смотрите. Ага. Стрим идет, класс. Стрим
Ого,
идет,
ого,
класс.
кто-то смотрит.
Классно. Мама, привет.
of it in the exercise files for this movie. Just like with the class, the object constructor uses a capitalized name to let us know this is a constructor function that produces new objects. The object constructor function captures the properties of the new object using its parameters, and then defines and assigns values for each property and method using the this keyword and dot notation.
Так, секунду.
So here we have
Так, блин, о чем вообще речь? Объектный конструктор. Конструктор вообще. Извиняюсь. Немного перемотал.
Just like with the class, the object constructor uses a capitalized name to let us know this is a constructor function that produces new objects. The object constructor function captures the properties of the new object using its parameters, and then defines and assigns values for each property and method using the this keyword and dot notation. So here we have this name, and it's populated with the value from the name parameter that's passed to the function. You'll notice that the difference between the class and the object constructor function here is the methods live inside
Угу. То есть класс, есть просто object constructor.
the main construction function, just like the properties do. So here we're assigning a new property, toggle lid, and then setting up a function inside. Whereas in the class, the definition of these methods happens outside the main constructor function. To create a new object from this constructor, we do the same thing we did with the class. We set up a new variable, give the variable a name, set it equal to or assign a value to it, and that new value is new backpack. So a new object based on this constructor function. Then we just pass in the values to match the list of.
Так, это, конечно, прикольно, но почему, во-первых, он все запихал обратно в один скрипт? Не мог уже как-то по одному делать. То есть я правильно понимаю, что если мы хотим конструктор, то мы просто пишем function. Что там еще? Function backpack. Ну, такие скобочки. И выбираем конструктор. Ага. И это типа все, да? И типа еще, не знаю, закрыть это надо или что? Блин.
Properties up here, and out comes here, and
Точка запятой. Так. Теперь не ругаешься.
out comes the list of properties.
Backpack. Немного поближе. Блин, в чем прикол? Че ты ругаешься? Типа. В чем фишка? Та-ра-та-та. Возможно, в точке с запятой. Нет, нет. Интересно.
Properties up here, and out comes a full object. The end result, properties up here, and out
Чпуньк. Ой, не там. Блин, в чем прикол? Ладно, сдаюсь. Было, стало, стало. Ладно. Допустим, да, в принципе, одно и то же считаю, только убрали здесь, что мы убрали здесь.
Out comes a full
Constructor.
object on this constructor function. Then we just pass in the values to match the list of properties up here, and out comes a full object.
Окей.
The end result is exactly the same as with the class, but there are some significant differences. The class allows us to do more things. We can extend classes, we can add new
Так.
features to them that are not available inside an object constructor function, and the class is now the preferred tool for creating objects based on a blueprint. That said, in old code and in a lot of tutorials, you will come across the object constructor functions because that used to be the only way we could do this, and that's why I'm covering it here. My rule of thumb is use a class unless you are required to use an object constructor function, because the classes give you more capabilities than the object constructor function does, and the only reason to use the older function is if you are running it.
Окей. Так, у меня есть секретные разработки, которые не мои, которые по работе. Надо проверить, что мы там используем. Блин. Нет, блин. Ай, ядрить, ладно. Эх, не могу использовать PHP Storm. Бесплатно месяц у меня уже прошел. Да. Ладно. Надо...
in an old code base or an old infrastructure that have yet to support classes.
Ну, в общем, понятно. Конструктор.
Classes feature heavily in modern JavaScript.
Ага. Не до конца понял это предложение.
Classes
Заняття широко використовують. Заняття широко.
feature heavily in modern JavaScript frameworks.
Вообще не понял.
Classes
Ну буквально перевело, окей.
feature heavily in modern JavaScript frameworks, and getting comfortable with writing and
Окей, допустим. Ё. Неудобно. Я просто когда нажимаю full screen, типа, если я нажимаю сейчас пробел, то оно выходит из full screen. Я хочу его поставить дальше, чтобы на play видос шел. Но нет, у меня теперь на пробел full screen. Неудобная фигня.
and using them will be a huge asset to you as you start working with advanced JavaScript sites and applications. To help you solidify your understanding of classes right away, here's a practice assignment for you. In the practice files, you'll find the backpack class we've been working with so far. Using this class as a reference, I want you to create new classes based on one or more of the objects you created in the previous practice sessions. I recommend creating separate files for each class and importing them as modules so you have a clear separation of concerns. The easiest approach to building a new class is to start with a fully built out object and then migrate the properties and methods over one by one. Then, once the class is complete, you can test it by recreating the original object using that class. Build several classes and objects based on those classes. Make sure each class has several properties and at least one method interacting with those properties. And test the objects created from the classes in
Это задание пацану. Хотя... Что может быть интересное? Что у нас там интересное может быть? Когда назад? Конструктор. Да я, блин, фиг его знает. Ну, шкаф пускай будет. Окей, давай даже попробуем на английском, потому что английский надо понимать. Шкаф. Да, блин. Шкаф. Closet.
Closet.
Closet, большой буквой. Конструктор. Так, ну, давай это оставим, это удалим. Шкаф. Крышка открыта. Ну и давай еще что-то свое добавим. Секции. Section. Окей, давай так. Pocket now убираем. Но это тоже можно убрать. Теперь section. Чпоньк. Section. Ну, типа 3 секции. Шкафчики есть у меня. Так, это можно убрать. Closet. Ага. Так, класс у нас теперь closet, import closet. Это все равно. И имя шкафчика. Я не знаю, Гарри Поттер пускай будет. Гарри Поттер. Окей, пускай будет Гарри Поттер. А что она предлагает? Прикольно. Ладно. 30 это у нас что там? Volume, color, orange. Не, давай wood. Lid open. Пускай у нас закрытый шкафчик будет. И section 3. Так, ну, в принципе, она уже даже сама должна выводить все это. Пробуем. Ага. Unexpected token. А в чем прикол? Может быть, тебе не нравится, что у меня тут тайпа нет? Тайп какой-то там. Тайп. Тайп модуль. Допустим. Так, тебе надо. О, серьезно? Pocket Num. Ну, конечно, у меня ж нету Pocket Num. Давай. Самое. Section. Number. Точка section. Так. Окей. Так, ну у нас вроде все работает. И оказывается, что без тайпа оно отказывает работать, да? Да. Интересно, не знал. Вот об этом я не знал. Надо прописывать type модуль. Да блин. Ладно, короче. Type модуль. Отлично. Поздравляем. Уже 45 минут, 46. Изучаем JavaScript. К сожалению, на 5 минут должен отойти. На 5 минут. Хотя, ладно, я уже придумал идти в туалет. Можно идти дальше заниматься JavaScript. Фух. Только я пианинко запущу. Так, ну задание мы выполнили.
In addition to the objects you build yourself, either directly or through a class or a constructor, the browser has a long list of default objects you can use for a variety of different purposes. A full list of all of these global objects is available and extensively documented in the MDN web docs. These global objects work exactly like the object we've seen so far, except we don't need to define them. They're just available through the browser, and for the most part, we interact with them through their methods. Let me give you an example of how these global objects are used with the help of the date object that you see here. I want to extend my backpack class and object type with a new property called date acquired, so I know when I got the backpack and I can do some math to figure out how old that backpack is. Adding the new property is straightforward now that we know how the object and the class works. We first add a new parameter to the class constructor, then we set up a new property, this date acquired, and populate it with that parameter, with the value. And then finally, we go to the script and just add in the new value. And here you see I'm passing a human readable string. So this is not a number, this is just text that I'm passing into that value. Now that we've added the property, we can output it in the browser using the same method we've been using so far. So down here, I'm console logging out date acquired, everyday backpack date acquired. So that is the property in question. If I go back to my browser, you'll see down here, we have the date acquired, and this is just that string. All right, now I want to convert this text string into something meaningful so that I can compare that date with the current date and figure out how many days have gone between them and figure out the age of my backpack. To do that, I'll seek the help of the date object. The date object can take pretty much any string that describes a date and time and convert it into something meaningful. What it does is it converts it into the milliseconds that have passed since the 1st of January 1970 UTC. And then it applies methods on top of that to convert that huge number of milliseconds into something meaningful for us humans. That's done using one of the myriad of instant methods that come with the data object. And as you can see, you can do so much with the data object. You can take any time or any date and turn it into milliseconds or minutes or months or the current date or just a year, or there's a ton of stuff you can do here. Let me just give you a brief preview of this. If we go into the console and I say, I wonder what date and time it is right now where I am, I can set up a new constant, call it right now, and set it equal to new date. Now you'll notice I am using a constructor here, just like we've done in the previous movies, only this time I'm using a constructor that already exists in the browser. Now I can output right now, and what I get is the current date and time. So October 6, 2020 at 2:30 in the Pacific Daylight Time Zone, and it's Tuesday. Cool. But I want to convert this into a shorter string. I don't need all.
Пробуем. Constant. Constant now equals. Как что это называется? New date. New date. Типа это окей, это окей. Теперь now. Ух ты! Да, сегодня у нас пятница, декабрь 29, 2023. Восточная Европа. +2.
All of that information. For that, I can use a method. So in this case, I'm going to use a method called toDateString. So if I search here, toDate, you'll see here, date prototype toDateString returns the date portion of the date as a human readable string. Thursday, April 12, 2018. Cool. So I want to use this. Now, just looking at this example, I can see this is an object prototype. So that's what we've been creating. And then we use the method on it. So let's try to see if I can do exactly that. I'll say right now, dot, and then toDateString, yes. And I want to run this as a function.
Так, now toDateString A. Now toDateString. А ну, в смысле? Вот так. Да, блин. Извиняюсь. А какие там еще были штуки-дрюки? Now.getDay. GetDay 5. Что значит 5? Почему 5? Типа, наверное, 5 день недели. А что еще там есть? GetDay, full year. Что значит full year? Просто год. Окей, а где это все берет? У меня такой вопрос.
So I add the parentheses at the end. And then we get Tuesday, October 6th, 2020. Okay, so the method works on the date object. That means I can now use the date object to do some pretty magical things. I can take any date and convert it to anything else, which is exactly what I want to do. If we scroll a little further down in the Backpack class, you'll see I've added a new method here. It's called BackpackAge. This new method uses the date object in a couple of different ways to do the math we need to figure out how many days it spanned since I first got the backpack. So first, I set up a new let. So a let is just a different type of variable. I set a new let called now and set it to new date. So that's what we just did in the browser. That gives us the current date and time right now. Then I set up another let called acquired. And here I use new date again, only this time I'm passing in the date acquired string. So I'm taking the string in the property and putting it inside the new date. What will happen now is the date object will give me that same output, except the output will be for the date I passed to it, that string of text, which in our case is December 5th, 2018 at 3 o'clock PST. Now I have two new objects, and these are milliseconds, and these represent the milliseconds since the 1st of January 1970 UTC for these two different dates, the current date and the date I originally acquired the back. These are now just single large numbers, and I can do regular math on them. So in the let elapsed, I say take the now date and subtract the acquired date. So that gives me the elapsed time in milliseconds. Then finally, I set up one last let called days since acquired. Here I use the math floor method to do some math on it to just take away all the decimals. And I say, take the elapsed value, which are all those milliseconds, and then first divide it by 1,000 to turn it into seconds, then divide it by 3,600 to turn it into hours, and then divide it by 24, which is the number of hours in a day. So this will return to us the number of days since I first got this backpack. All right, then I return the days since acquired value, so that would be the number of days, to wherever the backpack age method was called. Then I need to use that method, and I do that just like I've used every other method so far. Console log days since acquired. I call the everyday pack object, and then I call for this new method called backpack age. I want to run it as a method, so I'll put parentheses at the end. Save this, go back in the browser, and now I get this output. Days since acquired, 670. So I've taken a string of text, used the date object to turn it into a meaningful date, then done some math on that date to figure out how many days ago that was, and return that back so that I can see it in the browser. This is a simple example of how powerful these built-in objects are. And like I said, there are a ton of these objects, and they do a ton of...
Standard built-in objects. Standard built-in objects. Есть такое. Прикольно, прикольно. То есть действительно очень много объектов, всяких методов. У нас уже по умолчанию есть в JavaScript в консоли. Круто. Круто, круто, круто. Хорошо. А что он тут творит, интересно такое?
Then to date string. If we scroll a little further down in the backpack class, you'll see I've added a new...
Так, 3.13 у нас. Скрипт. Нет, у нас backpack. 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 Так, окей. Ну, кстати, это тоже надо понять. Скрипт. Шпонк. Шпонк, окей. Так, это у нас new day. Переменную now. Переменную now. То есть... Не понял, что ли все обновилось? No, так, new date. No, ага, вот. Так, у нас, окей, появляется это. New day, this day, acquired. Это у нас что такое? Не до конца понимаю эту строчку.
Method here. It's called backpack age. This new method uses the date object in a couple of different ways to do the math we need to figure out how many days it spans since I first got the backpack. So first I set up a new let. So a let is just a different type of variable. I set a new let called now and set it to new date. So that's what we just did in the browser. That gives us the current date and time right now. Then I set up another let called acquired. And here I use new date again, only this time I'm passing in the date acquired string. So I'm taking the string in the property and putting it inside the new date.
Блин, все равно не понимаю.
What will happen now is the date object will give now and set it to new date. So that's what we just did in the browser. That gives us the current date and time right now. Then I set up another let called acquired. And here I use new date again, only this.
Все, я, кажется, начинаю понимать.
This time I'm passing in the date acquired string. So I'm taking the string in the property and putting it inside the new date. What will happen now is the date object will give me that same output, except the output will be for the date I passed to it, that string of text, which in our case is December 5th, 2018 at 3 o'clock PST. Now I have two new objects, and these are milliseconds, and these represent the milliseconds since the 1st of January 1970 UTC for these two different dates, the current date and the date I originally acquired the back. These are now just single large numbers, and I can do regular math on them. So in the let elapsed, I say take the now date and subtract the acquired date. So that gives me the elapsed time in milliseconds. Then finally, I set up one last let called days since acquired. Here I use the math floor method to do some math on it to just take away all the decimals. And I say, take the elapsed value, which are all those milliseconds, and then first divide it by 1,000 to turn it into seconds, then divide it by 3,600 to turn it into hours, and then divide it by 24, which is the number of hours in a day. So
берется новая строка, которая, ну, сегодняшняя дата, прям свежайшая дата, число. И берется старая дата, когда был создан этот рюкзак. Вот. Не до конца понимаю, прям на 100%, как именно, но берется как-то при помощи вот такой вот... Почему тут прописано date? Почему нельзя написать this date acquired? Обязательно надо создавать как-то, не знаю, новый объект. Ну ладно. Создали, да и создали. Дальше у нас Просто отнимаем друг от друга, ну и разницу показываем. Это насколько времени прошло с тех пор, как у нас
So this will return.
рюкзачок создался. И что это у нас получается? Обновляем дата пальца. Как
Return to us the number of days since I first got this back. That method, this output, days since, and then I call for this new method called backpack age.
Ага, понятно. То есть теперь у нас everyday или что? Интересно. Хм. 1849 дней прошло. С 2018 года 5 декабря. Многовато. Ладно,
I want to
мы
run it
поняли.
as a method.
Ой. Фух. Блин, я не громко дышу? Вроде нет. Не понял, что ли все обновилось? No.
Pack class, you'll see I get this out. That is the
Стало. Не понял, что ли все обновилось? No. Короче, ладно.
pack class, you'll see I get this out.
Показалось, что я громко дышу. Дальше. Что у нас помимо date есть? Ну, дофига всего, да. Что это такое? Ресурсы. Ресурс. Источник для девелопера. Окей, ладно, идем дальше.
At the end of each of the main chapters in this course, I've added a code challenge so you can solidify and validate what you've learned so far. Now, I want to stress this. This is not a challenge in the you must pass this test sense. Instead, it's a real world example of a JavaScript problem you'll encounter at some point during your work so you can apply what you've learned in the chapter and get feedback on your progress. Each challenge in the course comes with an intro video like the one you're watching right now, where I explain what you're going to do in the challenge, then the challenge itself, where you write code and get feedback, and then a video where I complete the same challenge in the challenge environment and explain how I solved it. That way, you can do the challenge at your own pace and then compare your results with mine afterwards. All right, time for the first challenge. You're going to create a new object constructor. In the supplied code, you have 4 constants: book title, book author, book publishing year, and book ISBN. And in the testing code, there's a call to an object constructor called book, where all of these constants are used. Your task is to create an object constructor for book objects that receives the 4 properties book title, book author, book ISBN, and book pub year, and then creates new objects from them. In the challenge environment, you work in the answer section, and you input your code here directly under your code goes here. The test code is down here, and it's what's fired every time you click test my code. Once you've built out your object constructor and you think you have a solution to the challenge, click on test my code. Now over in the console output, you'll get one of several different types of output. If you got it right, you'll get a message in the terminal saying you got it right, and it'll give you some feedback about how you passed the tests. If you get it wrong, you'll either get a syntax error like what you see here, where there's a missing component in the code, or you'll get feedback on what tests passed and what tests failed. If you need further information about the challenge, open the information panel in the challenge environment for a full breakdown.
Ага. О, хорошо. Добренько, добренько. Так, ну, я, в принципе, думаю, можно сделать 10-минутный перерыв. Отлично. На 10 минут. Кайф. Все, отойду. Ой-ой-ой-ой-ой. Так, короче, хавку взял. Нормально. Есть, можно жизнь. Жизнь. Жить. Немного хавки взял. Жалко, нет вебки. Потом, может, покажу, куплю. Чем я тут питаюсь, как тут лежу. Блин, соус закончился. Эх. Блин, а чё я... Короче, я пока офнусь. Приду, не знаю, через сколько.